So, interesting times for Brexit at the moment. There has been an apparent breakthrough, but don't read into that too much. But an interesting article here from the Fleet Street Fox. It's the 7 stages of Brexit denial. Finally we know why they're all so angry. So it starts off with, "Hooray and huzzah, we finally have a Brexit breakthrough. The problem is that it doesn't look like Brexit. And it's not a breakthrough. So much as an agreement to go into counselling. And finally it's become clear why the self-labelled Brexiteers are so bloody angry. They've lost. They are watching the death of their dearest, longest-held dream. Up there on the world stage, their fantasy." Oh. Here we are, yep. Their dearest long-held dream. Up there on the world stage, their fantasy of a new Elizabethan age, filled with financial bucketeers, Thatcherite homeowners, and pop larking, is dying like dapper laughs, rape routine, and a Beyonce gig. The Prime Minister is a prime pillock. The Brexit Secretary can't decide whether he lied to us previously or is lying to us now. Boris Johnson has had a zip fitted to his mouth. Michael Gove is pretending to be a hippie, and the Trade Secretary thinks that the British bassoon industry can save us all. Oh, that's hilarious. We'll go into that story another time, but ugh. Britain has caved in on most of what we demanded and compromised in previously unacceptable ways on the West. The 20 billion divorce bill we vowed not to pay has been replaced with an offer to pay 39 billion, and Nigel Farage, who told us such long-term financial obligations of a bloated, unaccountable superstate should be ignored, says that applies to everything except his bloated, unaccountable £72,000 a year superstate pension. The UK state pension is a maximum of £6,359 a year, just for perspective. Many Brexiteers campaigners have spent their long lives loving the idea of hating the EU, but they've built careers and purpose upon it. Now the logic is killing off Brexit. With the inevitability of the Grim Leaper, it is a lemming festival, and they are going through the 7 stages of grief. So here they are. So number 1, shock. On the day of the referendum, no Leave campaigner seriously expected to win. Nigel Farage conceded defeat, Michael Gove went to bed, and David Cameron thought he'd still be Prime Minister. Next morning, Dishface resigned. Farage declared a total unshakable victory on the basis of a 52-48 majority he'd vowed only a few days earlier to ignore, and Grove told his wife, "Gosh, I suppose I'd better get up." Remainers were shocked, Leavers were shocked, the EU was shocked, and even America, then yet to vote a cat-bothering warmonger into the presidency, shook its head sadly in our direction. Stage 2. Denial. The first thing the Tories did, having endured 40 years of civil war over the EU, was to split themselves into factions to fight a leadership battle. They didn't tell the EU we were off, we didn't write a thank you letter. They began a whole new fight and got an indecisive Remain leader with the task of uniting a divided party, healing a divided country, and juggling the most important negotiations in living memory. Labour did the same, and ended up with an indecisive Leave leader, unable to harness the votes of 16 million people opposed to Brexit. The Lib Dems sat down and cried, and the EU carried on as normal, and Nigel Farage resigned again. Then the government took a private citizen to the appeal court and argued in all seriousness that a vote to restore parliamentary sovereignty did not mean Parliament could decide things. And Theresa May claimed the same divine right that had ultimately led to Charles I parting ways with his head, and the judges said no, and they were called enemies of the people. This is fine, the Brexiteers said. This is absolutely fine. Stage 3, bargaining. Farage's ego, bereft of purpose, got on a transatlantic jet and went off to beg attention from Donald Trump. He then became a shock jock because if anyone was suited to fact-free, unapologetic cowpoking, it was him. Cameron haggled for an £800,000 advance on his memoirs, a shepherd's hut on his third home. Osborne got a newspaper and $65,000 a year for one day a week at the world's biggest investment firm, and made space in his freezer. And Jeremy Corbyn ate noodles. The disgraced Liam Fox said the EU trade deal would begin immediately and it would be one of the easiest in human history. Then he said that they couldn't talk about trade yet, and that would be talking about it to everyone else, who couldn't agree a single deal anywhere until after we'd left. And finally, that everyone should invest in woodwind. Yes, that is a real thing, he actually said. And we'll get to that later. We're negotiating, said the Brexiteers. We might walk away without a deal. That would show them. Stage 4, guilt. It turns out that no deal means no Eurotam. It means the European Court of Justice forever. It means an immigration nightmare. It means Ireland bootlegging everything that's not nailed down. It means expensive court cases and having to find billions of pounds to fund infrastructure, farm subsidies, industry regulators, and watching our biggest money makers pack up and leave. EU nurses are staying anyway, holding hands with Donald Trump. Hasn't stopped him from retweeting Britain First. Boris is all but banned from speaking in public, and Grove is trying to make up for everything by being nice to animals. Theresa, meanwhile, called a snap election that has led to a brief moment of tearful introspection as she realised that our nation was even more indecisive as she was. Stage 5, anger. At this stage, most Brexiteers are at blaming someone else. It's Theresa May's fault because she's a Remainer. It's Jeremy's fault for not picking a side. It's definitely not UKIP's fault, or Nigel's fault, or Boris's, or none of them are ever going to say sorry. When it looks like our negotiations are being handled by a low IQ charlatans, then we've conceded on every major point that no nation with a land border with the EU can exit without a hard border, and we can impose a hard border on Northern Ireland when the customs union, the single market and the EU regulators cannot be abandoned, and we have to pay more than we do now for the same things that we already have, and we realise Brexit will merely remove our ability to influence the rules that we must abide by. It is not their fault. It's not their fault for not spotting it sooner. It's the EU's fault, say the Brexiteers. Stage 6, depression. So it turns out that the Brexit Secretary boasted of spending money on impact assessments that he now insists have value close to zero, and in fact don't exist anyway. It turns out Northern Ireland cannot leave the EU, and if we're going to go then, the rest of the UK has to remain, in all but name as well. It means less money for the NHS rather than more, because we're paying the EU like we used to, only this time we don't get a rebate. Oh, and to top it all off, the democratic vote for the entire United Kingdom of Great Britain, Northern Ireland, to leave the EU is logistically impossible. Northern Ireland cannot leave, and the rest of us do. And if the rest of us do, the union dissolves. Either way, the whole of the UK does not want to do what it said on the ballot paper, and democracy is dead. Brexiteers at this point are the last ones at the party, looking into the bottom of a plastic beer glass which they're starting to realise contains More spit than it does beer. Oh bugger, they mutter. The final stage, hope. At some point between now and 2019, someone will say, we need to take back control. They will demand more money from the NHS and less to go to the EU superstate. Point out our parliament is being ignored and they are unnecessary new layers of regulations, and that the only way out of this mess is to reverse Brexit. The only people still screaming leave will be Nigel's latest paramour and whoever is left of the main two parties at whatever is left of their leaders. When a second referendum on the deal is held. The options will be A, remain, B, leave, which will actually be the same as remain, only more expensive. The Brexiteers will never admit that Brexit was impossible or that their chosen champions were a disgrace to professional clowning. And if the EU has any sense of timing, this is the point that it will offer a concession on control of free movement and will allow the critics to save face while changing their minds. Brexit will be dead, but we won't want to talk about it. So, as you can see, at this point, guys, can we just admit that, Brexit was just, a complete cock-up? Can we just admit that this wasn't it wasn't a mandatory referendum, that this was an advisory, so the government had to do nothing, and that, that we are far better off in than leaving at this point. I think we can all agree that at this point. Because otherwise, what's the point of us leaving if we literally have to stay but pay more to the EU and get none of the benefits that we get now?